Hello, welcome to Sci-Fi Scavenger, my booktube channel. A special welcome if you're a first-time visitor. Very glad to have you. Today we're going to run through my top 15 science fiction series. But first I should tell you about the rules, the constraints that I've used for this list. And they are as follows. Number 1, the series must contain 3 or more books. Number 2, obviously I must have read it. And number 3, I must own a physical copy of the whole series. That does rule out a few that I might otherwise be a contender, because I went through a bit of a Kindle phase some years back and still have some catching up to do in terms of stocking my physical science fiction library. So 3 or more books, I must have read it, and it must be gathering dust on my shelves. So them's the rules. Okay, ready? Let's do this. So in 15th place is Empire Games by Charles Stross. It's a parallel universe tale. This series follows on from the Merchant Princes series, which was 6 books. After their feudal world was nuked in a devastating sneak attack by the US of our world, the protagonists have taken refuge in a world where the American continents, both north and south, are run by British anti-monarchy revolutionaries, and Europe, including Britain and much of the rest of the world, is run by the royalist French. So they are the 2 superpowers of this world. Our refugee world jumpers must persuade the locals to gear up for a future war with the US. There's a lot going on in these books. There's espionage, political intrigue, royal shenanigans, rapid technological change, world jumping, of course, and later on, an Orion spaceship. You remember the Orion concept? A sort of massive steel pusher plate with propulsion provided by a series of thousands of atomic bombs. What's not to like? It's not without its flaws, but I enjoy the story and I'm a sucker for an alternative history. Number 14 is the Broken Earth trilogy by N.K. Jemisin. One might argue that this is fantasy rather than science fiction, but it's my library and my rules. I think in my defense, there were definite sci-fi flavors. There's a far future Earth and long lost technology, just to name a couple. Anyway, I really enjoyed these books, devouring all 3 in short succession. I liked the non-linear plot, although that did confuse me, but then I'm easily confused. I liked the main characters and I enjoyed the basic premise of the books, the ability to manipulate geology, even on large tectonic scale. I remember thinking it was quite different to anything else that I'd read. At number 13, unlucky for some, is The Protectorate by Megan O'Keefe. A good new space opera with a strong female protagonist. It's got alien technology, a self-aware spaceship, a band of plucky cyberpunk thieves, a glitchy Stargate network, fearsome Astro Special Forces, and a seemingly invulnerable galactic corporate empire. I gather she has a new series coming out this year, and I'll definitely be nabbing that when I see it. Ada Palmer's Terra Ignota is at 12. Less a series, more of an endurance test. I really enjoyed Too Like the Lightning, book 1, and really enjoyed Perhaps the Stars, the series finale, but I struggled through the middle of the tale, the meat in this substantial sci-fi sandwich. I felt a bit like I'd accidentally signed up for a classics course or a Renaissance history course. A lot of this went over my head, but I was worried throughout that I was missing something important, a reference, a clue, a motivation, something that would have improved my enjoyment of the story. This sense is really what keeps Terra Ignota out of the top 10 for me. There are some cracking ideas in the series. I love the hive idea. I thought that the conflict between them for the future of humanity, Earthbound or Among the Stars, was really well done. I also appreciated Palmer's writing style, which is lyrical without being dense, cheery and satisfying, not trivial or simplistic. It was almost Victorian, old-fashioned. Perhaps like the classical references, this is a hangover from her day job as an academic. I'll definitely be interested to read whatever comes next from her. At number 11 is The Expanse by James S.A. Corey, a 9-book epic and a multi-season hit on our TV screens to boot. Is it a classic? No. Does it have a coherent plotline? Not really. Does it fall short on the possibilities offered by the ring gates and the universe beyond them? Definitely. There are many criticisms one might make, many justified, but I mainly don't care. I like the characters, particularly the found family that the crew of the Rocinante became, absorbing new members along the way. I liked the hilariously potty-mouthed UN politician Christian Avara Savala. I liked the plucky Belters and their battle for recognition and independence from the Inners. And I liked the Martian Laconian arc. There was lots for me to like. Finally, I like the way that they look on my shelf. Before we hit the top 10, a quick viewer welfare check. Are you still with me? Still awake? Awesome. At 10 then, an oldie but a goldie, Heliconia by Brian Aldiss. I've had this set for decades and I've read it 2 or 3 times, but not for many, many years. My biggest recollection is the big idea behind the books. The planet that's home to the story has a complex orbit around a binary star. The era-length seasons are driven by the planet's eccentric orbit around the furthest star, while the shorter, more normal variations in the seasons are driven by the nearest star. The long seasons are thousands of years in length and are so starkly different that entire civilizations rise and fall. New species evolve and spread and then go extinct. Aldous stitches these together cleverly. There are links, some more tenuous than others, between the books. I do wonder what happened to Heliconia Autumn. Did his editors just say, no, Brian, we said 3 books, a trilogy, one of them will have to go. Let's drop Autumn. No one likes November. Next at 9 is Book of the New Sun by Gene Wolfe. I've only read this once, just a couple of years ago, and I suspect, like many first-timers, was unaware of the deep lore, speculation, even conspiracy theories that surround this epic far-future tale. I know enough to know that I need to read it again, perhaps many times, and that rich layers of hidden depths will then be revealed. It was good enough on my virgin surface-only read to justify its position in my top 10, and I suspect on further reading it will only climb the rankings of my personal series hit parade. At number 8 is Remembrance of Earth's Past by Cixin Liu, often referred to as the three-body problem. I suppose there's some novelty value inherent in Chinese science fiction. Not much of it's translated into English. I enjoyed the slightly different slant on it that he brings, an Eastern perspective instead of the usual American or European take. I've always found the Fermi paradox a fascinating thought experiment. If there are so many intelligent species out there in the universe, as the law of averages seems to demand, why don't we see any evidence of it? The author posits that the reason for this is that those that survived technological advancement are immediately vulnerable to attack and destruction by potential competitive species, so they must hide in the dark forest. The incautious don't survive long enough to be seen from afar. The Hyperion Cantos by Dan Simmons, starring the terrifying time-hopping Shrike, at number 7. In truth, I don't remember much about these books. I recall that the first was a retelling of the Canterbury Tales, and I recall the religious plague of the fall of Hyperion. But books 3 and 4, which I've definitely read, are largely a blank for me. The Shrike is what cuts through the years. It's a really well-drawn sci-fi baddie, a boogeyman, with unknown motivations, unknown nature, and unknown abilities. So it's the Shrike that carries this series well into my top 10. Only a rereading will tell if it fully deserves its lofty perch. At number 6 is The Dark Tower by Stephen King. I have a long-running love affair with this series. I started reading it back when Stephen King himself didn't know whether the series was going or if he would continue to write it. Never mind eventually finish it. It clearly grabs hold of him as strongly as it grabs hold of me. As finish it, he did. There are parallel worlds, a boy, a dog, a cast of well-drawn supporting characters, and the fascination of a dying world. But most memorable of all are Roland, the last gunslinger, and his arch-nemesis, the Man in Black. I love the way King writes, the way that he develops characters over the whole arc, and I love the clues he gives to Roland's aristocratic past. And I love the way that the story traverses Midworld and ours. It's really good, and I think it's probably time for me to reread it. So propping up the top 5 is the Mars trilogy by Kim Stanley Robinson. More by luck than judgment, I have the 3 books in first edition hardbacks, which I bought when they were published and kept on my shelves ever since. So we follow a group of 100 colonists on Mars. This epic series, more of a future history than science fiction really, spans hundreds of years. Factions and alliances develop, those that prefer to leave Mars as a pristine environment for humans to tread lightly and to live effectively in quarantine, and those that intend to terraform Mars so that it's fit for human habitation. Later in this series, other factions arise, including those born on Mars, driven by what they want for their planet, their inheritance. And also the first 100, the remaining original colonists, some of whom live for hundreds of years through longevity treatment. Science heavy, some say that this series is stodgy, a bit serious, but I love it. But one particularly memorable event was the destruction in a terrorist attack of a space elevator. Robinson vividly describes the after effects as the elevator cable, which would have been hundreds of meters thick, collapses, achieving terrifying velocities it whips around the planet, leaving a trail of nuclear-scale devastation in its wake. At number 4 is the Revelation Space series by Alastair Reynolds. I'm really thinking about the 4 books that now form the core series, but I could also include the standalone books that are set in the same rock-hard science fiction universe. An astrophysicist himself, Reynolds is a big believer in sticking to the realms of the feasible in his work. No faster than light travel for this guy. This constraint means that his novels span long stretches of time to allow for the decades or even hundreds of years of elapsed time inherent in interstellar travel. I like the darkness in these books, the threat from melding plague, from the genetically engineered hyperpigs, from the civilization-eating inhibitors. And I like the different offshoot factions of humanity, the ultras and the conjoiners and the simmering conflict and mistrust between them. This is top-notch space opera. Frank Herbert's Dune is at number 3. I have a confession. I last read the entire series of 6 books when I was in my teens, which is getting on for 40 years ago. I have since read the first Dune book a few times, and I'm always surprised by how well it stacks up for a book written so long ago. It doesn't seem to date, unlike many other science fiction books written in that era. I suppose it's true then that the whole series is propelled close to the top of my list, mainly on the strength of the first novel, Dune itself, and my vague but fond recollections of the others. I am long overdue a reread of the full set. At number 2 is the Luna trilogy by Ian McDonald. It may be that there's some recency bias at work here. Unlike some of the series in my list, I have at least read it in the last few years. In the near future, humanity has colonized the moon, but it's not an egalitarian arrangement. The hard work has been done by a handful of hard-nosed family corporations focused on exploiting different elements of the moon's wealth. The series has been billed as Game of Thrones on the moon, with a touch of Succession thrown in for good measure. That may be a helpful comparison, but I think it very much stands on its own feet. There are some fantastic ideas in these books. Lunar contract law is everything. After all, the place is run by corporations, but this is no ordinary stuffy contract law. Trial by combat is baked into the process, and the lawyers are therefore also highly trained in hand-to-hand combat. They're lethal killers. And this is also a sexy series. There's a lot of creative, sexually diverse, low-gravity lunar sex going on. But fundamentally, it's a tale of ruthless revenge, of family ties, of treachery, of power, wealth, and ambition. And I really enjoyed these books, and I really wish MacDonald would find a way to add to the story. Which brings us to the top of the heap. What do you think it'll be? Any guesses? What's conspicuous by its absence so far? What are you thinking? Surely it'll have such and such at number 1. Okay, let me put you out of your misery. Top of the pops, at number 1 in my top 15 science fiction series is The Culture by Iain M. Banks. I did have a little argument with myself about whether this is really a series or a collection of only tenuously connected standalone books. Honestly, I think it's more the latter, but whatever. I'm including them here because they are awesome. Banks is so inventive. I love the spaceships and the minds that control them. I love the names that he gives them. Much of the action in these books is on the periphery of the culture, involving planets and peoples that the culture's contact division aims to civilize or at least nudge in that direction. There's no prime directive operating here. I'm not sure if I could pick a favourite from them, but if you twist my arm, I might particularly recommend Accession and Inversions, which are really very different, but really they're all top drawer. Incredibly, it's nearly 10 years since Banks sadly died, so we must savour what there is of the Culture books for the rest of time. I think the Culture sort of series will take some knocking off of its top spot, but maybe that'll happen as I read more series and reread some of those already in the top 15. So those are my top 15 science fiction book series. What do you think? I'm hoping that you'll tell me that this is all wrong, that I've missed out critical science fiction series that I absolutely should have included, or that you disagree wildly with my rankings, or that my self-imposed rules don't make any sense. So please have at it in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. That's it for today. Thanks for watching, and I'll be back soon with another video. Bye-bye.